Since the dark days of the Horus Heresy, Imperial scholars have long debated how the most loyal legions of the Adeptus Astartes could have fallen so far. How the purest devotion became hatred. How nobility turned to wickedness. Yet, when it comes to the Night Lords, some whisper their hearts always belonged to the shadows. Created with higher purpose, perhaps their destiny could have been different, but their legacy is one steeped in poisoned belief and atrocity. Even when they were counted among the loyal Space Marine legions, their nature raised questions. Some argued they were necessary, monsters forged to drag a barbaric age into a civilized future. Others believed they were a mistake, a rare misstep by the Emperor, worsened by fate. A few have always wondered if the 8th Legion was damned from the beginning, never meant to survive the future they would help shape. In the end, such speculation is moot. Whatever the cause, the Night Lords were creatures of horror, and had always been. From their birth, the 8th Legion was steeped in blood. Its first recruits were drawn from the linked prison sinks of ancient Terra. Vast, cavernous obulettes buried beneath the planet's surface, filled with the wreckage of millennia and those condemned never to see light or freedom again. Here, in this place of shadow and silence, only the strong survived. Those ruthless enough to kill, cunning enough to hide. Among these hopeless warrens, children were born, pale as moonlight and silent as ghosts. They moved like wraiths through the dark. Even hardened murderers avoided them. These were the night's children, whispered of in fear. And it was from these ghost-like offspring of the dark that the Emperor would forge the 8th Legion. They were unlike their brothers. Ashen-skinned, dour, shaped by a gene seed that seemed made for them. It heightened their ability to see through darkness far beyond other legions. Yet their gift was also a curse. Sunlight and starlight pained them. Though they now walked the world above, the warriors of the 8th Legion had already been claimed by eternal night. The Emperor first unleashed his 8th Legion on those who clung to the sins of old night. Some had knelt only because they believed resistance futile. Others thought the Imperium a passing empire like all others before it. The crimes against unity wore many faces. The Saragorn Enclave's secret gene splicing, the psi-breeding horrors of the court of Antaeus, the vast human march to extinction known only as the March of 10 Million. When such abominations needed more than annihilation, when they required justice, vengeance, and fear, the Emperor sent the 8th Legion. The warriors of the 8th had no tolerance for ambiguity. There were no gray areas in their understanding of the world. Truth was light, guilt was shadow. The night was for monsters, and monsters only understood one thing: blood. To the 8th Legion, justice was a blade, cold, sharp, and uncaring. They were weapons meant for darkness, forged to win a war for a light that would never welcome them. At least, that's what history says now. Perhaps it is too kind. Perhaps some sought nobility in monsters to make sense of nightmares. Perhaps they simply hoped there was meaning behind atrocity. Many claim that the fall of the Night Lords began when Konrad Curze, the 8th Primarch, was reunited with his legion. But the truth runs deeper. It was not just Curze, it was the world that made him. Nostramo. A hive world swathed in night. Nostramo was bleak and sunless. Its star was dying, and the smog of 1 billion furnaces blocked what little light might have reached the surface. Its cities, Nostramo Prime, through Quintus, were towering mazes of stone and iron. Smokestacks stabbed the sky. Black bridges crossed shadowy streets. Cathedrals squatted amid slums thick with gargoyles. The air stank of industry, of blood and ash. Light, when it existed, flickered dim and blue in the homes of the powerful. For the rest, there was only darkness. Nostramo mined adamantium, and the wealth it generated went to a ruling class that devoured the poor. Its people were pale and pupil-eyed, their bodies thin, their minds haunted. Depression and suicide were more common than birth. Death came in many forms: sickness, despair, brutality, and worse. There were no true laws on Nostramo, only fear. Gangs ruled every level of society, from the gutters to the gilded halls. Violence was law. Murder was economy. From the iron overseers to the sons of toil, every gang served a noble house, and every noble was a criminal king or queen wearing a crown of rusted filth. In Nostramo, children grew to know that life was pain, justice a joke, and survival the only commandment. Weeping was the wind's music, and every alley, every corridor, every breath of foul air carried the unspoken truth. The dark ruled everything. It was this world, the world of blood and ruin, that raised Konrad Curze. And it was this world that ensured that the Night Lords were never truly loyal, only waiting. According to a forbidden chronicle, handwritten and heretical, entitled The Dark, the Primarch Konrad Curze's first memory was of falling. He descended to the night-wrapped world of Nostramo in a crackling sphere of light, a meteoric birth that tore through the sky like divine judgment. His gestation capsule flung through the immaterium and crashed into the heart of Nostramo Quintus, the planet's largest hive city. It did not stop at the surface. It plunged through broken strata, crushed structures, forgotten infrastructure, and even the planet's crust, before lodging deep within the unstable geosphere near the molten core. That descent carved a wound into the world, an adamantium-veined scar that no natural force should have made. The crater it left became a place of fearful myth. Some whispered that the capsule had ridden volcanic vents back to the surface. Others claim the child within had swum through molten metal itself to claw his way back to the lightless world above. But unlike his brother Primarchs, Konrad Curze was not taken in by a family. No parents waited to nurture him. Instead, he rose alone, a pale specter in the nightmare underhives of Nostramo Quintus. There, in the soot-choked blackness, he hunted feral creatures for food and endured the screams of a world rotting from within. Cursed from birth, he was racked by precognitive visions, horrors of futures that had not yet happened and might never come to pass. These waking nightmares would haunt him until his final breath. He grew in solitude, becoming something more than a survivor, more than human. Driven by ruthless will and sharpened by the lawless cruelty of Nostramo, he emerged not just as a predator, but as an executioner. And with each atrocity he committed in the name of order, the hive grew quieter. In less than a year, crime in Nostramo Quintus collapsed to nothing. The transformation was seismic. A curfew emerged, not by decree but by fear. The once bustling midnight streets emptied. Children were warned to obey, lest the night haunter find them. Rumors took root, whispers of a creature that moved unseen, of claws that tore flesh from bone. The name Night Haunter was spoken first in dread, then in reverence, then silence. By sheer terror, Curze brought the planet to heel. He hunted its criminal overlords like vermin, eviscerating them in alleys and displaying their remains as gruesome warnings. Nobles and murderers, slavers and scions alike, all bled in the shadows. And in their place, a twisted peace took hold. The Night Haunter became Nostramo's Dark King. He ruled alone, absorbing every scrap of knowledge he could find with obsessive diligence. Curze governed with wisdom until injustice was whispered. Then he acted. He pursued wrongdoers through the ruins and alleys, striking only when exhaustion failed them. His retribution was monstrous, but precise. He did not destroy the guilty. He marked them, scarred them, and shattered them. This duality, calm ruler by day, nightmare by night, drove Nostraman society into a fearful harmony. Wealth was shared not by fairness, but by fear of having too much. No one dared stand above their neighbor. Under the Night Haunter's gaze, the capital thrived, and the rest of Nostramo followed suit, if only to keep the horror from their doorsteps. With terror as his blade, Curze purged his world. The syndicates and aristocracy fell. The law was no longer a system, it was a man. Even then, his instincts betrayed what he would become. He was a hunter by design, cloaked in shadow, striking with surgical malice. The 8th Legion, crafted from his gene seed, would share these traits: stealth, ambush, psychological warfare. Long before their fall, the Night Lords adorned their armor with skulls, bones, and symbols of death. For them, fear was a weapon greater than any bolter. Almost a full century after the launch of the Great Crusade, the Emperor arrived on Nostramo. It was prophesied, they say, a coming of divine light to a world that had never known the sun. and that the arrival would bring its end. The Emperor's ship cut through the gloom and landed upon the shadowed surface, his light shining like a second star. The people of Nostramo could not bear to look upon him. Their eyes, shaped by generations of darkness, wept and blistered in his radiance. Some fell to their knees, others screamed or fled. The light reflected off the wet stone streets, searing the vision of any who dared raise their heads. At the end of the broad avenue leading to the Night Haunter's throne, Curze stood alone. When the Emperor approached, the Primarch was struck by a vision so horrific he attempted to tear out his own eyes. Only the Emperor's hand stopped him. "Be at peace, Konrad Curze," he said. "I have arrived, and I intend to take you home." Curze's answer was soft but resolute. "That is not my name, Father. My people gave me a name, and I will bear it until my dying day. And I know full well what you intend for me." With that, the Night Haunter joined the Imperium, not as a soldier reborn, but as a man resigned to fate. Curze learned quickly under the Imperium's wing. He studied doctrine beneath the tutelage of Fulgrim, and soon claimed command of the 8th Legion, renaming them the Night Lords. They were ruthless, efficient, and without humor. No strategy existed for them but overwhelming fear. The Night Lords became ghost stories for rebellious worlds. Entire systems paid tithes and purged undesirables at the mere rumor of their approach. And Nostramo, it fell again. Without Curze's grip, crime and rot returned. The recruits sent to the Night Lords were no longer children of justice, but killers and scum, reflecting the darkness of their world. Some argue this poisoned the Legion. Others claim it simply revealed what was already there. Whatever the truth, Curze led them down the path himself. Planet after planet fell to peace through atrocity. Cities were crucified, populations flayed. At first, the horror had purpose. Soon, it became indulgence. Even Curze's control began to slip. His visions worsened. His disdain for his sons grew, but he never stopped them. He urged them on. The 8th Legion was no longer a necessary evil. They were monsters, by action, appearance, and by joy. They became the hammer of compliance. If a governor hesitated, if a world questioned tribute, the Night Lords came. If petty defiance was detected, they answered with extermination. The Emperor was not blind to this. Records hint at confrontations, demands, threats. But no punishment came, no sanction. Why he stayed his hand, none can say. But his silence was damning. The spiral deepened. The darkness claimed them further. The Night Lords earned censure even before their fall. They were truly the first damned legion. Made of darkness, commanded by a man racked with foreboding, enslaved to fear. Perhaps they never had a choice. Perhaps they were always meant to return to the night that birthed them. Nostramo died in 984 M30, but its death began long before the first lance battery ever fired. Many Imperial scholars point to the drop site massacre as the first true betrayal among the Primarchs. But buried deep in the sealed archives of the Imperial Palace lies an older truth, one that predates Istvan and Prospero, one that tells of a brother raising hand against brother long before Horus turned his eyes to rebellion. At the heart of that truth sits Konrad Curze, the Night Haunter. The incident unfolded in the bloody aftermath of the Shadow-World Compliance, a brutal campaign waged to bring a stubborn clade of humanity under Imperial rule. The Emperor's children, the Imperial Fists, and the Night Lords had all been deployed. Rare was the campaign that saw 3 Primarchs march together. Rarer still, one where so little harmony existed between them. Rogal Dorn and Konrad Curze were never made to understand each other. And when the final city of Shadow-World fell beneath the wrath of the Night Lords, its people butchered indiscriminately in a spectacle of terror and fire, the tension snapped taut. The other legions had long looked upon the Night Lords with a mixture of distaste and unease. The excess of their retribution had earned whispered scorn and loud condemnation. Curze, increasingly consumed by visions of calamity, began to wither from within. He saw the galaxy falling to chaos. He saw the ideals he had bled for twisted, his sons becoming murderers with no cause. The Night Haunter withdrew into himself, devoured by visions of a future he could not change. Then word came. Nostramo had fallen back into corruption. Haunted, broken, and desperate, Curze sought counsel from his brothers, but their ears were deaf. He had never stood close to them, and his pleas were met with doubt and scorn. His prophetic seizures worsened. He foresaw his death. He foresaw the Night Lords at war with their own kind. But even Fulgrim, who had once mentored him, found no comfort to offer. Isolation bred paranoia. The gulf widened. Then on Shadow it erupted. Curze confided in Fulgrim, confessing his visions of damnation. Fulgrim, disturbed, repeated the confession to Rogal Dorn. Already enraged by Curze's cruelty, Dorn confronted him, accusing him of slander, blasphemy, perhaps worse. What happened next was buried. Records end in silence, but the aftermath was clear. Dorn was found broken and bleeding. The Night Haunter's honor guard lay dead. The 8th Legion's Primarch was placed under arrest, pending judgment by his brothers. There would be no judgment. Curze escaped his prison in a maelstrom of blood. His jailers died screaming. He fled with his legion back to the dark world that had birthed him. There, the vision was fulfilled. In orbit, above Nostramo, the Night Lords formed in ranks, and their ships turned their lance batteries toward the planet's heart. They targeted the very scar that Curze's arrival had once seared into the world's crust. Fire lanced down. The core destabilized, and the world broke. Nostramo, smothered in smoke and sin, cradled in darkness, tore itself apart. It was Curze's right, as Lord of Crusades, to make such a decision. But it was more than execution. It was judgment, defiance, a severing of ties. With Nostramo's death, the Night Lord shed the last fragments of restraint. Some believe it was Curze's final act of loyalty, to cleanse his world before it fell deeper into depravity. Others say it was a message to the Imperium, a signal of rejection, a warning of what he was capable of. What happened next remains obscured by contradiction. Some records claim Curze returned to Terra, that he stood before the Emperor and the Council of Terra, condemned for the unthinkable, exterminatus upon his own home world. Curze's defense was cold and unwavering. Nostramo had collapsed into lawlessness once again. In his eyes, its death was justice. He accused the Emperor of hypocrisy, pointing to the very crusade that demanded obedience through blood. Were they not forged to sanction terror? Others whisper that Curze never returned at all, that he vanished with his legion into the shadows of the crusade, waging private wars in the outer reaches of imperial space. In this telling, Terra remained silent, fearing what the Night Haunter might do if provoked further. Punishment came not in proclamation, but in quiet exile. Supplies ceased, requisitions vanished. The 8th Legion was cut adrift. Whichever version is true, it is known that in the early years of M31, Curze was summoned once more, recalled to stand with the Emperor's Chosen against Horus Lupercal at Istvan. But the seeds of betrayal had long since taken root. To many, the Night Haunter was the most obvious villain among the traitor Primarchs. His legacy was one of fear and murder, his mind fractured, his actions already stained in infamy long before Istvan. He had attacked Rogel Dorn. He had slain his own world. Yet this view is simple, and the tragedy of Konrad Curze is not. Like several of his brothers, Curze had inherited a portion of the Emperor's foresight, a shard of divine ability to see into the many paths of the future. But where the Emperor saw countless branching fates, Curze saw only one, a single road. It was paved with death, with betrayal, with the fall of the Imperium and his own end. No matter what he did, no matter how fiercely he fought or how perfectly he served, the vision never changed. He was damned. His sons were damned. The galaxy itself would drown in war, and he would die, alone and forgotten. It broke him. By the end of the Great Crusade, Curze teetered on the edge of madness. No one truly knows what drove him to join Horus. Perhaps it was defiance, a last chance to change his fate. Or perhaps it was surrender, to destiny, to darkness, to the inevitability of what he had always foreseen. When the Thramist Crusade began, he was no longer a general, no longer a builder of empires. He was a specter, a shattered soul chasing purpose and blood. His legion followed suit. Some remembered honor and the light they once sought, a others drowned in slaughter. Curze no longer led. He wandered through his memories and his madness, while his sons chose their path. Some to preserve what little remained of their pride, others to feed the nightmares he had always feared. As war consumed the Thramas sector and the eastern fringe, the Night Lords burned, and in their fire, the soul of a legion was lost. Even as the galaxy convulsed in the firestorm of the Horus heresy, the first echoes of the Night Lord's final tragedy began to ring. Konrad Curze, their haunted Primarch, would become a herald of those echoes. The Legion, torn by inner torment and distrust, began to turn inward, lashing out against itself in a desperate bid to excise what it believed to be corruption within its own ranks. But they had chosen the wrong enemy. The rot had not seeped in from without. It had always lived within the Legion's heart, from the very beginning. From the moment the Emperor crafted Konrad Curze, and he was set upon Nostramo, the seed of decay had been sown. The curse they sought to kill was the Night Haunter himself. Unlike his brothers, Curze had only inherited a fragment of the Emperor's foresight, a sliver of divine prophecy twisted by incompleteness. And within that fragment he saw ruin and his own death, saw his sons drowning in atrocity, cast into an eternal war against those who should have been their kin. For a time he fought against the vision. He killed and punished. He tried to carve a better path, one corpse at a time. And yet, no matter how much blood he spilled, the vision never changed. When Horus shattered the Emperor's grand design and plunged the galaxy into madness, Curze looked again, and the future was still the same. His resistance gave way to resignation and then to madness. By the Thramas Crusade, the Night Hunter had ceased to struggle. He had embraced the inevitability of damnation and found comfort in the futility of his existence. The death and terror that followed were no longer tools, but truth. Infuriated by the Emperor's rejection of their methods, Curze and the Night Lords pledged themselves willingly to Horus's rebellion. When the first blow of treachery fell at Isstvan III, the galaxy was stunned. Yet some were surprised to see the Night Lords among those still counted as loyalists in the opening battles. For years, they had stalked the shadows between condemnation and necessity, enacting terror on behalf of the Imperium. Perhaps it was that legacy of punishing those who strayed from the light that convinced some the Night Lords still stood for order. But as the betrayal at Isstvan V soon revealed, they had not severed ties with the Great Crusade because of loyalty. They had done so because they had become the very criminals they once hunted. Once unfettered from any pretense of honor or purpose, the Night Lords unleashed themselves across the stars in a campaign of terror that echoes still. They fought in the siege of Terra. They broke worlds in the eastern fringe. Even after Horus's death, they hunted, killed, and burned, driven not by conquest, but cruelty. To the eyes of the traitors, the Night Lords appeared a formidable asset, experienced, brutal, loyal to none but vengeance. Horus knew this, and placed them at the forefront of his war effort. In the wake of Isstvan, they were sent ahead to herald his coming, to show the Imperium what price rebellion carried. Across dozens of systems, They spread death like ink across parchment. Those who bowed were spared. Those who resisted vanished under a tide of flayed skin and screams. Fear became compliance, and compliance tribute. The northern reaches of the Imperium collapsed under this psychological warfare. But fear is a tool that dulls with use. In time, the Night Lords became an infection rather than a weapon. Every setback, every drop in production, every administrative failure was met with disproportionate punishment. Whole cities were put to the sword for the sins of paperwork. It became clear, even to Horus, that they were now more danger than asset. And so, the War Master repurposed them. As they had done in the north, so would they serve in the east. There, on the edge of Imperial control, Horus would let them loose upon the stars that once called Nostramo their heart. Horus turned the 8th Legion toward the Nostramo sector, home to nearly 100 populated systems. Though Nostramo itself was dead, its neighboring world still pulsed with bitter hearts and dark industry. For the traders, it was a treasure trove of resources and recruits. But to Konrad Curze, it was something else. It was a mirror, a memory, a judgment. What he found there was rot, corruption renewed in his absence. Gangs ruled, syndicates bloomed. Cities returned to crime and cruelty, far from the brutal order he had once imposed. To other legions, this might have been manageable. Co-opt the gangs, demand tribute, feed Horus's war machine. But Curze had not returned to negotiate. He had come to punish. The Sindarks of Kedor IV learned this firsthand. They pledged loyalty, expecting an alliance. Curze gave them death. But even as the Nostramo sector burned under the Night Lord's return, a deeper fracture split the Legion itself. For generations, the 8th Legion had drawn its recruits from these very worlds. And what those worlds had become, so too had the Legion. The new Night Lords were not the same warriors who had once fought beside the Luna Wolves and the Blood Angels. They were brutes and butchers. They had no code, no creed, only fear and domination. The veterans of Terra and the older Nostraman lines saw it clearly, and they despised it. These two factions, those who sought power through violence, and those who still clung to a shadow of principle, began a cold civil war within the Legion. At its heart was Konrad Curze. Some, like Knackered Thrall, wanted only to leave Curze behind, to rule as warlords beneath Horus. Others, like Sevatar and Barbatos, fought to restore their Primarch's focus, to remind him that he was more than a prophet of doom. They bore the red gauntlets, a mark once of death, now turned to a symbol of loyalty to the old ideals. There were no open battles, no declarations, but across Thramis, Night Lords bled each other just as much as they bled their enemies. Through assassinations, dishonor, sabotage, and manipulation. As the Thramis Crusade began in full, it was not just the Imperium they fought, it was themselves. When the Primarchs of the Traitor Legions met aboard the Vengeful Spirit, Konrad Curze did not stand among them in flesh. was present only as a shadow, projected by a hololithic emitter, remote and withdrawn. To him was given the eastern fringe. Sagulasa, Heraldar, Thramas. Forge worlds, border fortresses, the crucibles of resistance. But the real purpose was simple. Horus needed the Night Lords far from Terra. They were dangerous, unpredictable, and cruel. Let them keep the Dark Angels busy. Let them destroy what they could. Let them burn themselves out on the rim of the galaxy. History would remember the Thramas Crusade as a brutal campaign between the Dark Angels and the Night Lords. But within the 8th Legion, it was something more. A war for the soul of Konrad Curze. Was he the tyrant Nostramo feared, or the weapon the Imperium needed? Was he the damned prophet of his own death, or still a Primarch deserving of loyalty? As war raged across the Thramas sector, Night Lords bled in silence, some for honor, some for power, all for a future that none could clearly see. And through it all, the Night Haunter drifted, ever deeper into prophecy and despair. His dreams of fire and betrayal becoming indistinguishable from reality. Whether he was leading his legion or simply watching it fall apart, he could no longer say. But one thing remained certain. He had seen the end, and in the shadows of Thramas, that end was drawing near. As his legion warred across the stars and battled over its fractured soul, Konrad Curze turned away. The Night Haunter, once the blade of justice, the shadow beneath the Emperor's light, succumbed to despair. Long had he wrestled with the terrible visions bequeathed to him by his father's psychic lineage. For years, he had imposed order through blood, tried to drown prophecy in execution, and silence madness in war. Nothing worked. He had slaughtered the corrupt Nostramo. He had warned his brothers that civil war was coming, and still, the galaxy fell exactly as he had foreseen. In his narrow glimpse of the future, the next 10,000 years were nothing but slaughter. A nightmare of betrayal, decay, and damnation from which he could not awaken. When his efforts in the Nostramo sector and the early battles of the Thramas Crusade failed to change the shape of destiny, Curze retreated. Deep within the fortress on Sagulsa, half-built and wrapped in shadow, he imprisoned himself. There he raged. He etched his anguish into the flesh of captives. He wept and whispered and screamed, withdrawing ever deeper into madness. The Night Lords, left without guidance, splintered further. Nacrid Thrall and those who bore the cross of bones filled the void, unleashing the Legion in a storm of indiscriminate slaughter across the Thramas sector. Meanwhile, Zevatar and the Inner Circle could do little but plead for their lord to rise, to lead, to be again what they once believed he could be. They would succeed, briefly. Curze sent a beacon to draw the lion to him. On the surface of Sagwalsa, the two Primarchs met in what began as parley and ended in bloodshed. What words passed between them are lost to time, but Curze slandered Hal Johnson. and the lion responded with a blow. The fight that followed was brutal. At one point, Curze nearly killed his brother, only for a dark angel to drive a blade into his back and end the duel. Both legions intervened. Both Primarchs survived. None can say what Curze hoped to gain. Did he wish to sway his brother to Horus's cause? Warn him of the fate that awaited them all? Or did he simply hope the lion would kill him and end his torment? Only blood answered. Later, on Sheol, he attacked again, and once more was dragged from death's edge by his own sons. His body broken, his mind fractured. But even as he lay comatose, the Legion still revolved around him, still tore itself apart over him. Though his plans had failed, Curze's withdrawal granted power to others. Thol's warbands, unchecked, overcommitted. As the Dark Angel struck back, the balance shifted. One by one, the champions of the Cross of Bones fell. Thol at Thramas, Veduk the Maimed at Sheol, others slain by Sevatar and the Atramintar. When it was done, Sevatar established a new Chiroptera, a council loyal to survival, not sadism. Under his pragmatic rule, the Legion began to rally. The plan was clear. Abandon the Thramas sector, leave behind the broken legacy of Nostramo, return to the War Master's side in the Segmentum Solar, and fight as a Legion once more. But fate intervened. The Dark Angels came first, black ships spilling from the warp like a tidal wave of retribution. The Night Lords resisted, wounded but not yet destroyed, until Konrad Curze awoke. He ordered them to turn, to strike. They obeyed. What followed was suicide. Legionaries turned back, charging into the jaws of death. Others, seeing the futility, fled blindly into the warp. The Legion was broken, scattered across the galaxy, unable to reform. All that they had bled for was undone by their own Gene-Father. The nightmare he had foreseen came to pass because of him. And so, the Night Haunter went into exile, a prisoner aboard the Invincible Reason, haunted by the knowledge that he himself had sealed their doom. In the dying light of the 31st millennium's first decade, the scattered warbands of the Night Lords struck at Sotha. The planet, though remote, guarded a priceless treasure, Pharos, a beacon, a relic, a key to Ultramar's defenses. It was a prize worthy of a War Master's praise. And Zahar Sayakar, a Claw Master consumed by ambition, led the assault. His forces descended in fire, drop pods rained, the city of Sothopolis burned. 7 companies of Night Lords fell upon the 13th Legion's defenders, and Sayakar, protected by elite Ultramintar Terminators, rode at the vanguard. The Ultramarines fought bravely, retreating street by street. At Attican Square, beneath the statue of Gilliman, they made their final stand. Sayakar responded with horror. He herded civilians as shields. He flayed neophytes. He defiled every standard of honor the Astartes once held dear. The square ran red with blood, then, as Syakar prepared to claim his triumph, the Atramintar turned on him. The true veterans of Sevatar's line. They had only ever been sent to ensure the upstart Clawmaster died when his purpose was served. Glory was meaningless. Only the knife and who wielded it mattered. Syakar died screaming beneath the gaze of the god he defied. The ambush at Sagulasa shattered the Night Lords, their fleet broken, their Primarch mortally wounded. The lion hunted Curze across the decks of the Invincible Reason for 16 solar weeks, but he could never catch him. Curze stalked the shadows, killing kill teams one after another, spreading terror as only he could. Eventually, the remaining Night Lords vanished into the void. Curze remained. The galaxy split, the ruin-stormed raged, the Astronomicon went dark. The Dark Angels, unable to reach Terra, were guided to Macragge by the light of the Pharaohs. There, they joined Sanguinius and Guilliman. Together, they forged the Imperium Secundus, an empire in exile. Sanguinius was named Emperor. The Lion became Lord Protector. But there was a snake in their midst. Curze, hidden aboard their flagship, broke free. He ravaged Macragge, spreading terror through its streets. Guilliman and the Lion confronted him, but he had laid a trap. The chapel collapsed, crushing both Primarchs, saved only by the intervention of barbarous Dantioch, a loyalist Iron Warrior. He reached through a portal opened by the Pharaohs and pulled them to safety. Curze escaped again. While the Night Haunter stalked unseen, spreading terror through the shadowed corners of Macragge, tensions between Lionel Johnson and Rabute Guilliman escalated. Though bound together by the fragile unity of Imperium Secundus, the two Primarchs clashed constantly, especially over security. The Lion remained convinced that the rebellions rising in the Illyrium region were Curze's handiwork. When a suicide bombing targeted an Astartes convoy, the Lion responded with characteristic severity. He declared martial law, deploying his first legion to enforce it. He called for orbital bombardment to level the rebellious region entirely, assured that such overwhelming force would finally bring the Night Haunter to heel. Guilliman and Sanguinius resisted, refusing permission for mass civilian slaughter. They forced the Lion to take another path. Instead, he unleashed the Dreadwing. It was during the assault on Alma Mons that the Lion found his prey. Amid burning ruins and broken stone, the two brothers met. Brutal, primal, and personal. In the end, L. Johnson bested Curze, demanding to know why he had turned from their father. "Why not?" Curze answered. He spoke of the monster in his mind, a thing he could never silence. And though the Lion had his brother at his mercy, he could not bring himself to kill him. Instead, he broke him, ripping away his power pack and shattering his spine across his knee. Paralyzed, Konrad Curze was dragged before the other Primarchs to stand trial. At the triumvirate, the Night Haunter defended himself, not with pleas, but with philosophy. Each Primarch, he argued, had been created for a purpose, His purpose had always been terror and retribution. How then could he be judged for following his nature? Then he turned the knife. Curze accused the Lion of violating Guilliman's orders, of authorizing orbital bombardment against civilians despite explicit commands to the contrary. L. Johnson's fury ignited. He would have struck Curze down had Sanguinius not intervened. Guilliman, enraged by the betrayal, snapped the lion sword across his thigh. With the trial in chaos, Sanguinius banished the Lord Protector from the Imperium Secundus. The Dark Angels withdrew from the crag hours later. But the lion could not let go. He brooded in silence aboard the Invincible Reason, questioning everything. Then, with a word to the Tucholcha engine, he returned. Alongside his Lieutenant Holguin, he teleported directly into the chamber where Sanguinius prepared to execute Curze. Surrounded by armed guards, L. Johnson made his case. Curze had foreseen his death, an assassin sent by the Emperor himself. If that prophecy was true, then the Emperor still lived beyond the ruin storm. Sanguinius, who bore his own terrible visions of death, knew the lion spoke true. When Guilliman asked what would become of the prisoner, the lion knelt and declared he would be Curze's jailer. The Night Haunter laughed. He had torn his brothers apart with nothing but words. Now bound and broken, Konrad Curze remained imprisoned aboard the Invincible Reason. L. Johnson visited him from time to time, hoping to harness his foresight for the Loyalist cause. But Curze was rarely cooperative, taunting, mocking, cruel. When the combined fleets of Guilliman, Sanguinius, and the Lion attempted to break through the ruin storm, they brought Curze with them. Sanguinius, guided by a vision, led them toward Davin. He hoped to prove a point to Curze, that destiny was not set, that the future could be rewritten. Sanguinius boarded the Invincible Reason, overpowered several Dark Angels non-lethally, and took Curze with him to Davin's surface. The Lion was enraged and nearly unleashed cyclonic torpedoes upon the world. Yet ultimately, all three Primarchs, Lion, Guilliman, and Sanguinius, descended together. They journeyed to the Temple of the Serpent Lodge, where Horus had once fallen. And there, everything changed. Curze, who had lived his life bound by visions of destiny, realized he had foreseen none of this. When Sanguinius was swallowed by Demon Medal's portal, Curze was distraught, genuinely shaken by the possible death of his brother. But when asked how to save Sanguinius, Curze could only whisper, broken. He did not know. Demons erupted from the warp. Curze was dragged back to the Invincible Reason. In the aftermath, a path to Terra through the ruined storm was finally revealed. Guilliman and the Lion would distract Horus's blockade. Sanguinius would race to the throne world. Sanguinius took Curze with him aboard the Red Tier, the flagship of the Blood Angels. But he had made a decision. Curze would not be brought to Terra for trial. He would not be executed. He would be given to fate. Sanguinius placed his brother in a stasis coffin and jettisoned him into the void, believing that one day the assassin Curze foresaw would find him. Konrad Curze drifted through the void for years, silent, dreaming, waiting. Eventually, the derelict coffin was found by the Sheldrune, an Imperial salvage ship. Among its crew was a disguised assassin of the Calidus Temple, Gun. Gun awoke Curze. The Night Haunter massacred nearly everyone aboard. Only 2 survived the carnage. The assassin Gun, who died soon after at Curze's hands, and a crewman named Elver. Curze spared Elver, needed him even. The ship lacked a warp drive, and it would take 4 years to reach Salgulsa. During the journey, Curze tormented his captive, yet also spoke to him. Elver came to understand something no one else ever had. Curze had doubts. He feared that his visions were not destiny, but delusion. When they arrived, Curze rejoined a Night Lord's force under Talos Valkyrat. But before that, he ordered Elver's death. The man had seen too much. Soon after, the prophecy was fulfilled. An assassin of the Calidus Temple, Miss Shen, found him. She did not need to chase him down. Curze did not resist. He accepted his end. He had long foreseen it. The Night Haunter died in silence, unblessed by the ruinous powers, unredeemed by his father. He died believing his death would prove his philosophy true, that his crimes, judged by others, were part of a cycle he could never escape. His legion was ordered not to pursue his killer, but they did anyway. Even in death, Curze had the last word. Unlike the other traitor legions, the Night Lords did not flee into the Eye of Terror after the heresy. They remained, bleeding the Imperium, striking at its heart, reveling in fear. But without their Primarch, they fractured. Jago Sevatarian, disgusted by what his lord had become, had already distanced himself. Now, warbands competed for dominance. Some sold their blades to pirates or chaos warlords. Some followed Abaddon in his Black Crusades. Others waged private wars of terror. They still paid lip service to chaos, but they only served themselves and the broken justice of their father. Their greatest raid in the years that followed was the sack of Scound's Fall, only a few hundred light years from Holy Terra. And from them came nearly all of Chaos's raptors. Then the galaxy broke. The Great Rift tore reality asunder, dividing the Imperium. The Night Lords rejoiced. With half the Imperium cloaked in darkness, the 8th Legion rose again. Departamento Munitorum worlds were stripped bare. Space Marine strongholds were looted. Astropaths were captured, tortured, and turned into psychic sirens, luring stranded Imperial vessels into traps. Entire planets were reshaped into monuments of pain. The Night Lords did not build empires. They built fear. They did not rule. They hunted. And in the Era Indomitus, they prospered once more. Their Primarch was gone, but his legacy endured. Terror still had a name. It was whispered in the dark. Night Lords.